Okay, so now we're going to get more into the church mission into the world. So the first one is Ad Gentis, the document on missionary activity. So the church, in its very nature, is to evangelize or to be a mission. So I'm going to try to make this as practical as possible, because a lot of times we think of missionaries as, oh, well, that's someone else. But when the church is speaking of missionaries, like I said, a lot of times we think, oh, well, those are those people that go to Africa and they speak to people that never know Jesus Christ. But even we are called in Tyler, Texas, to, in a sense, we're on the mission front also. There's plenty of people that may know a little bit about Jesus, but do not know the fullness of his faith or the church that he founded. And so we'll always should be looking to evangelize others. So I'm going to try to take the guidelines that the church gives here and make them practical to us. So how does the church do missionary work? Well, it kind of gets three principles. First, to be a witness. So it calls people to go into a community of non-Christians and just live with them and be a Christian witness. So we evangelize others through our lives. So if you have a non-Catholic friend or people in your workplace, the best way to evangelize is to be Catholic. And so you may say, well, that's simple, but like praying before meals is a great evangelization tool. My favorite story about that is my little girls. We've slowly trained them, and they're now becoming very not as good as they used to be at praying before meals. Like, that's what we do. Now they usually grab for the food first. But we had them where they wouldn't eat the food unless we prayed. So we had some friends over that were falling away Catholics, and we all got pizza out and started eating, and my daughter goes, wait, we need to pray. So again, a great little evangelization tool of living out your faith, going to the holy days of obligation, of making it known that you are Catholic. So the reason why I say that is once that happens, you usually get questions. So the church states, okay, so once you've witnessed, you then preach and assemble the people. So that, again, a missionary will go into a community of non-Christians, live with them, begin to preach, establish a community of converts to begin to catechize them and teach them in the faith. So the same with us. We witness, we begin to get questions. So you're a Catholic? Oh, why do y'all worship Mary? Well, great. Well, let me explain what your misunderstanding there and what we believe. You need to know our Blessed Mother. So it's a great way to first be the witness, then to catechize, and then they call them to start forming a Christian community by discerning the vocation and begin to form priests and religious from that community. So again, okay, so on a practical side, you've lived the faith. You now have someone that's asking you questions about the Catholic faith, and then you're going to help slowly start to discern, okay, well, this is our faith. How about you come to RCIA, or how about you come to Mass and trying to then invite them into the community. So it's not a perfect system, but it's an intent. This class is free. So, next is Christian education. So, the document says that all people have the right to an education. So it doesn't matter your race, gender, or anything. Everyone has the right to education. So what is a Christian education? And it puts out 5 points. Each point kind of goes over the 4 pillars of the catechism. So the mystery of our salvation, how to worship God, so we see that as a sacrament, forming a person in justice and truth, so we can see that forming a moral compass in them, making them virtuous, discern their vocational calling, which starts primarily with prayer. So when we think of Christian education, a lot of times we just think of, okay, we got to go over the creed. Here's the creed, here's the 10 commandments, here's 7 sacraments, but it's more forming the individual also. And then lastly, to be productive in society and culture. And that just doesn't mean, okay, I have Johnny, I'm going to give Johnny a lot of good math and science. Johnny's going to become an engineer or play football at Texas A&M. No. But not just be productive in the workforce, but in forming the culture, because if the student's going to be either a priest or called to the Mary wife, whatever they're called to, they still are called to transform that culture. So it's broader than just being a good, successful lawyer or engineer or teacher, but transforming that culture. So responsibility for giving a Christian education. Who do y'all think is the primary person? The parents. Oh man, that is correct. So parents. So the parents are primarily to form the child in the faith. So that involves teaching, forming them in virtue. I always enjoy doing the baptismal classes because I like to compare it to you have 2 responsibilities. One, to keep a child alive. So you teach them what not to eat and what to eat, what not to stick a fork in and what to stick a fork in, all those things so that they don't electrocute themselves. Tell them what to wear. You don't wear shorts on nights like these. All to keep them alive physically, but we also need to teach them and form them in things to keep them alive spiritually. So it's primarily the parents, but they're not the sole educators. The church plays a role. So we have catechetical institutions, schools, WCC or CCD or PSR or any acronym that you want to give it. The church likes to make up acronyms. But through media, formation groups, so Bible study groups, all those are ways to form people. And it's not just children, but even ourselves, we need to continually be educated in the faith. So I'm speaking to the choir. I understand that, but it's something to always remind ourselves, and not just intellectually, but how we being educated morally, and how are we being formed in our prayer life also. Yeah. So a lot of times, just to make one statement is, the church doesn't say, okay, you have a child, great, send them to a Catholic school or send them to the parish CCD program, and you're good. No, the church calls for parents to play an active role in the education of the child. Cool, we did it again. That's neat. All right, so ecumenism. So this is the first statement on ecumenism is that Jesus founded one church with one faith and one sacramental economy. So I am here we're trying to do this by a personal analogy. So take it for what it is, right? So Christ formed the church, and this analogy is flawed in some sense, but this is a toolbox, okay? So this is my way to make a toolbox on PowerPoint. Doesn't have a handle, okay? So Christ gave the church the full means to sanctify us. So he gave us the deposit of faith, which is scripture and tradition. He gave us the authority to interpret the scriptures and the Pope and bishops. He gave us the 7 sacraments to sanctify us. And he gave us also the ability to administrate the sacraments and the priests. So there's other things, but I'm going to just focus on these 4. These are, in a sense, the tools that Christ gives the church to sanctify us, to know God and to receive his grace. So we've had separations from this church. We've had the Eastern Orthodox. So if you went up here and looked at the diagram, there was an asterisk by all those Eastern rites with the date when they came back into union with the church. So at 1056, 4. Many of the Eastern churches broke away, and they've slowly come back and recognizing the Pope as the visible leader of the church. But some of them haven't, and so we call them Russian Orthodox or Greek Orthodox, but in general Eastern Orthodox. So we're going to explain how they are different from Western Protestants, which is the majority of what we encounter today in East Texas, and what this has to do with ecumenism. Okay, so Eastern churches, here's Christ's toolbox, here's Eastern Orthodox toolbox, okay? So when they broke, this is not the church that Christ founded, so they took some of the tools to make their own. So they have the full deposit of faith, the sacraments, so we recognize that they have valid sacraments, and administrators of the sacraments, because they did not change their holy orders. So they have valid priests, valid bishops, their sacraments are valid, so it's really Jesus' body and blood. Their confessions are valid, but they reject the authoritative body that helps guide them, the Pope. So that's all that they have, and really all they need to do, and I'm very, very oversimplifying this, is usually correct some of their statements and accept the Holy Father as the church. So, but if you're in a pinch, and you're in Greece and you couldn't find a Catholic church to go to, you could, in last resort, go to an Eastern Orthodox church, and they would have a valid mass for you to attend. You're not supposed to go when you have the ability to go to a church that's in union with Rome.
Do they have an authority as the Roman Light?
Well, they have what's called usually like a patriarch that oversees them. But even all the other Eastern churches in union with Rome see the Pope as, so like the Maronites, the Byzantines, they are all in this box. But and I think we have I know we have an Orthodox church community that meet in Bullard here. So there is a community here. But does that make sense? Or
They have patriarchs, but the patriarchs are usually in charge of their own little area.
yeah,
And so you have kind of like the patriarch of like Alexandria or something like that may be held in higher esteem than some of the other smaller ones. But they don't have one that's in charge of all
yeah,
churches. Each one is kind of in charge of their own.
yeah,
Kind of like a bishop.
yeah.
Did you say that Russian Orthodox is not in union with Rome?
And
Russian
yeah,
Orthodox?
yeah,
It's not in
no.
union with Rome.
Which
Anytime you hear the word Orthodox, that usually refers to them not being in union with Rome.
no, there can be deviations from within the Eastern rites that may come from there, but if the statement is the Russian Orthodox Church, then no. Or if,
You're right, yeah. We've come closer and closer.
yeah,
The last patriarch of St. Petersburg, or maybe Moscow, I can't remember where the patriarch was at, was extremely close to JP2 and Pope Benedict. And the one who they elected after him is not so friendly. It's no
Yeah.
longer, the battle is over the Holy Spirit. Historically, that's no longer the case. It's
Yeah.
almost 100% an authority issue. Who has authority? And all it is about governance of the church. And
Yeah.
it is kind of sad because if we look at all the churches, the Orthodox churches that are in union with Rome, if we could get the Russian Orthodox Church, that's 200 million people. That's 200 million souls. Maybe not living their faith just like many Latin Rite Catholics living their faith every day. But that's so much power when you think about this, just sheer numbers of it, and you think about the potential for it. JP2 frequently talked about breathing with both lungs. He meant the lungs that were in union with Rome, and one of the lungs, a big part of that lung that's infected right now is the Russian Orthodox Church.
yeah,
It would be a beautiful thing to see them come into union with Rome.
And sadly, a lot of that is still political. It is
Yeah.
theological, but there are
It's most of
and then we have ecclesial communities are Protestant, and so when Luther and Calvin and King Henry and Zwingli and all of the reformers who left, they didn't just say we disagree with the Pope, we're going to appoint our own bishops and continue what the church does. They took some of the deposit of faith, so there's a little bit of the Bible. So they rejected tradition. And then they took some of the sacraments, and but in all of them, they stopped the ordination of priests, and they rejected the Pope, so that was it. So really the only sacraments that we see they have are baptism, and then marriage due to the outside of ecclesial form in a sense. So they're not bound by the church's regulations. And that's it. In both of those, you don't need a priest to celebrate if you're outside the church. So they don't have the full means of salvation. So they don't have all the tools to be sanctified or to grow in holiness. They have some. So again, I'd like to use the toolbox as an example. So I like to try to build things. When I have all my tools, it's a lot easier. I can build a better structure. But when I have only some of the tools and I'm trying to use my ratchet as a hammer because I lost my hammer, it's harder to build. So I know Jason spent a lot more time on on salvation for those out that are Protestants and that whole debate. So I'm not going to really get into that unless we want to. But I just like to break that out. So what is ecumenism? So its primary purpose is a movement toward unity. So a lot of times we hear ecumenism and we have different ideas. So ecumenism is clearly knowledge of things held in common and the things that are distinct. That's what it's supposed to be. So that's what the document says. It's not a priest and a Lutheran pastor coming together and saying, okay, you know what, we got 7 sacraments, y'all got 2. You know what, we could kind of do away with confirmation if you accept the other 6. And we'll call that an agreement. That's not ecumenism. We don't take, so it's not a negotiation of compromises. It's not a debate where we have 2 people out there and they start debating and then we're like, oh, well the winner is that side and we choose that side. So, and that comes also with our example with how we deal with our non-Catholic friends. We're not trying to win a debate with them and say, oh, well, haha, I remember more Bible verses than you. I just proved you wrong. Or, again, trying to compromise and make this third-party religion of, no. So it's just clearly saying, okay, this is what we accept in common, and this is what we make in distinction. And the reason why this is so important is a lot of times, a lot of the differences are just due to misconfusion. Now, it says common worship is not a means to ecumenism, but a witness to it. So, when speaking of this, an example would be we have ecumenical prayer that happens a lot here. A primary example would be for the election. So we all came into union of what we believe was best for our country and we wanted to pray about. Or you see this a lot at like pro-life events. We say, we're in union with this, let's pray about this. But we don't just come and say, okay, well we need to come to our Mass and we're now going to be in union because you celebrated Mass with us. It's a sign of that union. And then the next one is open heart and prayer. And the reason why I put that is a lot of times we need to recognize when we're talking to someone. Sometimes people are open and sometimes they're just not. And prayer is the best way. And because, again, I might just be speaking on my own experience. A lot of times when speaking to a non-Catholic, it tends to come into just a debate of who's going to win with the most scripture verses that they memorize. And it's not really someone trying to grow in unity and understanding of what is in common and what is distinct and what is what Jesus really taught. Because we have the fullness of truth, the fullness of means of salvation. So we just need to tell people it. In a charitable way. Okay, so I put these 2 examples of successful dialogue. So one is a common declaration by Pope John Paul II and His Holiness the Patriarch Mara Ignatius Zaka. And he was the patriarch of the Syrian Orthodox Church. And just to put a background, the Syrian Orthodox Church broke away because they were believed to hold a heresy called monophysitism, which was one energy source. Or it stemmed from the thought that Christ only had one will and not two. So it was this huge debate. So they left. They were considered as heretics. But what the problem was, it was more of an issue of language. They were using one language, trying to, in Greek, and Rome was using Latin. And whenever they were translating those terms, there was a conflict there. So it wasn't that they believed something heretical, it was just the expression of it sounded heretical. So when the Pope dialogue, trying to figure out, okay, so what do we hold in common and what is our distinctions, they found out that they really held everything in common. And so they came back into communion with the church. So again, it wasn't a debate, it was just trying to figure out, okay, so really what do you believe? Another example is the joint statement of justification with Lutherans. Again, this didn't bring any Lutherans back into the church, but the great thing is when you read the document, it states what we hold in common with the Lutheran and what is distinct, what the Lutherans see as important. Just to clarify, because a lot of times many Lutherans now do not hold to the harshness of what Luther held with the whole faith and works. When you get down to many individuals, they don't believe that. Again, I'm not saying all, but a lot of times people don't hold the harshness that I just accept Jesus Christ and I don't have to do anything. I don't have to change my life. I just have to accept it. Some do hold that, but many don't, and a lot of times it's just a simple dialogue of figuring out what the other person believes. And a lot of times the non-Catholics believe that we as Catholics believe we don't need grace. We can just work, and if I do these 5 things, I don't even have to have any relationship with Jesus. I just have to do these things and I get to heaven. Well, we don't believe that either. So it's a misunderstanding, and just through a simple dialogue, no one may even come to conversion as this, but there's at least a mutual respect. So again, the most important thing is it's not us saying, oh, well, we don't accept this anymore, or something of that. Does anyone want to add?
Well, I'll just say, like, the Syrian Orthodox Church, they were part of the Coptics, and they had been separated from the church before the Eastern Orthodox did in 1054. So, like, the Syrians, they were separated from the church since the 600s.
Yeah.
So the fact that, in 1984 we were able to heal a 100-year-old wound just by simply talking about, hey, let's clarify our language, and even and that was the thing back in the day where you had all these prevailing views of who Christ is and stuff, that the language was so important. So, yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
See, I'm having a little bit of trouble with this whole thing about ecumenism, because on an earlier slide you were saying that the whole point of it was unity.
Yes.
And then, these various churches in the Eastern, Western Protestants were separated. And yet, in the case of the Syrian Orthodox, it did accomplish
Yes.
real unity because they came back into the church. But if I should write that statement of justification for Lutherans, they didn't come back to Catholicism.
That's and
How do we, I guess, it's like how does unity come about if there's no conversion, if they're not
yeah.
in other words, to have true unity, then those who are separated, and I thought your toolbox was very effective, I thought that was really good, of visualizing the differences. So obviously they're lacking.
Yes.
Protestants are lacking more of the tools even than
I guess I would say it's a movement towards unity. So even if the Declaration doesn't bring about unity, but at least brings about clarification and might lessen hostility. Like the Syrian church, like Jason said, took 1,300 years, so it may just take time. But the key, I think, from a practical standpoint, because let's be honest, no one here, unless Father Prime becomes Pope or something, none of us are really going to ever participate in these huge dialogues. But if you want to get down to the practical individual soul, someone that's the key is to kind of use these things to clarify differences. But I want to move on really quick so that we can go over religious liberty in 5 minutes. So non-Christians, I'm just going to skip that. Okay, so religious freedom. There's 2 principles, because this one's so immediate, and then we're going to end with this one. So the 2 principles that you can kind of pull from the document is that the church has a right to express herself to the people, so that the state cannot stop the church from expressing the truth. And then the people have a right to freely choose it or to reject it. So they can't be forced to accept it, or they can't be forced to reject it. They must have the ability to choose or reject it, and the truth must be able to be portrayed. So those are kind of the 2 principles for religious liberty. So again, the reasons why truth and the good must be allowed for man to know, and it cannot be forced on someone by a government or religious institution. Someone must have the ability, so the government can't force someone to not choose or to choose. It has to at least give them the ability to choose, and why you can't force someone to love God. So when I met my wife, I had to convince her to marry me. I couldn't hit her with a club and carry her up the aisle and say, I do. So the same is with religious liberty. So I want to go into a little bit more practical side of this. So for individuals, this is also, they need to be allowed to externally express the truth that they seek. So they have to have the ability to seek it, and they have to have the ability to express that truth that they find in their religion. So the community or a state or a government can't suppress someone from expressing us to go to confession, or you can no longer go to church on Sunday. That would be a violation of religious freedom. So a community should be allowed to preach and worship in public, freely appoint and train its leaders, which is not happening kind of like in China, where a lot of times the bishops are appointed by the state. That would be against religious freedom. And that's supposed to be forced. And so the community can't force religion on others. And then families have the right to raise their children in the faith. So to try to go over, so there's really 2 different views of freedom, and I wish I had more time to go over. The church view of freedom is the ability to choose a good. And that's very different between the world view, which is the ability to choose anything. Like I just have the ability to do whatever, as long as I have the ability to choose whatever I want. So with the church view of freedom, we see the good is decided by God. So God tells us what's good, and then we choose it, and that's our most perfect expression of freedom. So we must know what is good to be able to freely act. So virtue, when we grow in virtue, we become more free. And when we grow in vice, we become less free. So an example is anger. When if anger controls me, and I struggle with that, with rage, I'm unable. Let's take my daughter. My daughter is having this trouble of pooping in the toilet. So she poops in her panties, and we've been trying to break this. And you have no idea how angry that makes me when I have to clean that up. So if I lack the control of that rage, if I lack self-control, that virtue, I am unable to love my daughter. I act out of anger. And so I don't have freedom to choose what is good for her. I choose what is bad, and where the worldview is all about man decides what is good and I choose it. And so virtue and vice, in a sense, if you want to follow it down, are both bad things, because virtue forms me to do what is good, vice forms me to do what is bad, but according to them, they just want to have the freedom to do whatever they want. And that's kind of the unrealistic idea, because the more that you do something bad, the more you do, and you become less and less. You have the less and less ability to not do it. So, I mean, we call those things addictions. Someone becomes addicted to doing a vice over and over and over. So it's almost like a self-contradiction in their thought. But now let's apply this to the HS mandate, something that's, because even the people that say it's bad kind of choose on the improper premise. So some people say the HS mandate is good because it allows you to choose whatever you want, or it's bad because it forces people to pay for something they don't want to pay for or agree with. And that's not why the church disagrees with it, because there's plenty of things that I'm forced to pay for someone else that I don't agree with. The reason why the church is against it is because the church, the HS mandate, is forcing people to choose a health care plan that is morally wrong, because it supports contraception. So it's a moral wrong. So I don't even have the freedom to choose what is good. I am forced to choose what is bad. So, and that's really, so the companies are forced to offer a health care plan that is morally evil, because it's supporting contraception, which is not just bad for our society, but for an individual soul. So there's a distinction what I want to make there, because a lot of times when we speak up against it, we're using the world's term of freedom, and we need to point to really what the church is meaning, because the church wants people to have the ability to choose what is good. I mean, so whenever someone's forced to choose an evil, it's going against their freedom and the expression of it. Does that make sense? Or yes, ma'am.
And you may or may not know the answer to this. Why would the Catholic Church defend only Catholic institutions under the HHS mandate and not defend all Catholics? Because this is going to be a universal thing in the United States. All insurance companies are going to be forced to provide free contraception.
Yeah.
And the bishops are only, and maybe it's just they have to cut their losses and go after what they think they can win.
Yeah.
Just defending the Catholic institutions and not
I'll think it might be a surely legal issue due to because I know they're representing them in a court, and so they may only legally be able to represent that which they're in control of. If that makes sense, or
Well, I mean, they're saying, like, the New York Diocese just won, they're gonna go to the next level in the court system. They won the first step, getting the judge to agree with their
yeah,
argument.
Well, what they're saying is that at an institutional level, what we are required to pay for goes against our moral beliefs. So they're saying that there should always be that choice to where we, because there's a difference between just allowing contraception to be part of a healthcare system or healthcare provider than to say, not only do you have to allow it, but you have to now cooperate with that evil. You now have to
Yeah.
pay for that. And so that they're crossing that line between allowing something and cooperating with it. They're removing that choice, because, I mean, we could sit here and say, well, you know, same-sex marriage is legal. We don't, the Catholic Church, we don't have to, do those marriages. So we have that choice to say, no, we will not do that. But it's as if the state is coming in and saying, no, not only do you have to allow it now, but you have to participate in it. And that's what they're doing with the HHS mandate. That they're saying, not only do you have to allow the use and availability of contraception within healthcare plans, but now we are going to make you pay for that specifically. Now, when they're getting into the courts and stuff, they're leaving that up to the different institutions. So the reason why it's just the bishops fighting for it is because they, as an institution, have to pay for it.
Yeah.
Other people are gonna have to come in, if it goes against their moral, laws as an institution, then they're gonna have to jump in. So you have, private Catholic colleges jumping in. They're not necessarily connected to the Catholic Church, other than them freely professing that they are Catholic and stuff, so they're jumping on board, with that as well. But also, there are Protestant groups that have joined in with the USCCB and some of the other state, New York Diocese and a lot of others like that.
I just wish they would defend Catholics as a, I know they have to defend their institutions, I mean, they have to. But,
Yeah.
I mean, Catholics, we have no voice.
yeah.
I mean, Catholics as a whole.
Well, and again,
The Protestants are coming on board with this too.
again, I don't know if it's an actual laws situation due to I don't know if they could span like the Diocese of New York, Archdiocese of New York, can say, okay, you're violating our institutions and all those, including who are Catholic that have small businesses. It might be just a legal thing where you can't represent 10,000 small businesses in New York due to paperwork. Again,
It's overturned, it's
Yeah.
what we've done in the courts. So
Yeah.
They have no other option, but it's just, I wish they would speak for Catholics as a whole in this country instead of just their own organizations.
Yeah.
We are a universal church.
Yeah.
I mean, we work for a secular company, so we have to say something in the matter. So we're voiceless.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know what to say because that's a very difficult situation to be in.
What I wish I think what you're talking about is they could have brought a class action suit that would have set up a whole class of persons that are going to be injured by forcing this thing.
Well, that's essentially what they've done, but it's at the institutional level as opposed to the individual level.
Yeah.
I think that probably there's probably some monetary or something of trying to make a whole class. But I agree with you that would have been an ideal thing to say that all Catholics, because we're all
Yeah,
Force, complicit, yeah.
yeah,
So
for,
I think that would have been, I personally would have agreed with you, I wish that we had had some kind of a class action suit that would have involved all Catholics. Those that identify with the church and really did, who fought that all, was wrong, but they didn't, I guess they wanted to go up and say, this institution over here, kind of chip away at it, maybe.
But if they beat it, don't they win that freedom for everybody regardless of?
No.
no, it's just for the institution.
Right now, it's mostly doled out to their cronies, but
Yeah,
the church has been taking the biggest beating because where we stand, where the Catholic Church stands, it's a spiritual battle.
yeah,
That leaves the individual. For instance,
At the mercy of the government.
yeah,
yeah, I know, but for instance, our health plan is now offering, to cover contraception.
Absolutely.
Well, we can do, say, I don't want
Yeah.
health coverage because
And,
Well,
having that,
and sterilizations.
Yeah.
they got that.
well, and the individuals,
Well, it's
Yeah.
like the Mexico City policy under like George Bush, he revoked it for, because they were using taxpayer dollars to cover abortions. And he said, he just said, well, that, I don't want to, you don't want to take money from somebody to put it to a cause that they think is morally evil. And so some of that was, revoked under the current administration, but.
Day one, when he was in
Yeah.
2008, that was the first thing he overturned. So,
Yeah.
So, anyway. Thank you.
no,